Longtime listener, first-time writer. I'm a woman in her early 20s working my way through college and trying to come out the other side with as little debt as possible. I've never had a reason to write into you before, but bro, something majorly effed up happened to me last month and I'm thinking, dang, I'm gonna send this into Let's Read. And so I do a bit of this, a bit of that, but one of my hustles is working as an Uber Eats driver when I have spare time from my other jobs or from going to the gym. I always gotta be on that graft, you know what I'm saying, brosif? No, anyways, this one day I get an order that comes up on the app, a McDonald's delivery, and I accept it because I'm nearby. I don't recognize the address, which is odd because I know this town pretty well, but whatever. I took the order, waited longer than usual for the teenage workers to get their thumbs out of their butts and prepare the food, and then off I headed to my delivery location. It turns out it was right at the edge of the perimeter that we're allowed to deliver within, so basically the food was going to be cold as crap when it got there, and still, not my problem, I thought. They ordered it knowing the expected delivery time, and that's what microwaves are for. Now, I only say this because the further I got from the McDonald's, the more run-down and grody the neighborhoods got. We started in a sort of run-down urban area in the first place and then drove through a suburb that looked like it had been cursed by the demon of poverty itself. It kind of looked like the way movies portrayed Detroit when they're trying to emphasize how bad it can be, but also maybe even more abandoned. There was barely any graffiti, which was weird. Like even the criminals and the youth gangs didn't want to hang out in this area, it seemed. And no wonder I'd never heard of the place before. Now, I heard fear being described on a podcast as bone prickles not long ago, and that term struck me as perfect. Driving with this goddamn McDonald's, the smell of fries and Big Macs making me feel kind of sick, I started suffering with the bone prickles. And the moment I heard the guy say that phrase on the podcast, I knew exactly what he meant. It's like when your entire body tingles and prickles thanks to some kind of unspecified fear, and I was feeling this just by driving to the delivery location. Now, eventually I reached this address and it was on the very edge of some rundown suburbia. Now, if this house had been the only occupied property on the block, I wouldn't have been surprised. The rest of the houses were completely dark, boarded up and run down. This one house had light spilling out of every window and chill, relaxing music playing loud enough for me to hear as I pulled up to the curb outside. Some kind of pop punk or something kind of fun. I manhandled the bag that keeps the food warm, although with how long it had taken to arrive at that location, I didn't have much faith in their fries being hot anymore. Again, everything had fallen within the promised delivery time, so no issues there. I hauled butt up the driveway, surprised at how heavy their food order was, and I knocked. It took a few knocks before the volume of the music inside lowered, and the door was answered by a pretty-looking guy, a very reassuring gentleman. Now, he must have been in his mid-20s, and he was wearing a band tee and had a goofy expression that made me think that he might have been stoned. Now, I explained that I was there to deliver the food, and he yelled back in the house that some chick was here with a McDonald's had anyone ordered any food. I explained that that was a pretty large order, so maybe it was for a bunch of them, and he seemed pretty confused by this. Now, he said that there was only 3 of them in the house, and they'd recently gotten a delivery pizza, so he couldn't really explain who'd ordered the McDonald's. I showed him the app and confirmed 100% that the address was correct, and he asked me to wait on the porch while he went and checked with the rest of the guys, and so I was just stuck standing there while I heard vague noises from within. Muffled voices turned into banging and almost shouting, and I began to feel that bone prickle again. Eventually, this goofy streamer reappeared at the front door. Now remember, I still had the food in the thermal bag at this point, and he apologized profusely, saying he was an idiot and the other guys had ordered McDonald's as well as pizza, and everything was all good. However, just as I started to unzip the bag, he told me to hang on because they wanted to offer me a tip. I told them they could do it through the app and they didn't have to do it at all, but this guy was absolutely adamant that they were going to give me $10 for the trouble, so if I could just wait on the porch again, he'd head inside and get the cash. Now, who even keeps cash around these days, to be honest? Now anyways, this time he left the door open just enough for me to see inside. The front door opened into the living room, and I was kind of impressed how clean and frankly awesome the place looked. They had framed posters on the wall, a couple of pinball tables in the corner, and an expensive-looking flat-screen TV. Now, this didn't seem to be the room that they were hanging out in either, and I sort of nosily peered around to see where my new delivery friend had gone to find my tip. Now, I saw him milling about back and forth past the door to what seemed to be a kitchen, and then calling out down a set of stairs to what looked like a basement. I wondered if they had an even more impressive home theater system down there or something, and I wondered if it was just one of those cases where someone with money buys a house that looks run down from the outside in an abandoned neighborhood area and then just uses the crappy exterior to actually mask a really awesome dwelling. Now still, it was none of my business. Now eventually my new friend came back with $10.69 and I just politely laughed at the obvious joke. Now I finally fished out the huge bags of McDonald's out of the insulated bag and I could tell already that by now they were cold, and I figured I just wouldn't make mention of it. This guy had kept me on the porch long enough at this point. Now after thanks and some goodbyes, I headed back to my car, got in, and then checked for more jobs. There was another one at the same McDonald's, so I figured why not. It had just come through, so by the time I reached the restaurant, the order should be ready. So I started to drive off. I have one of those reversing cameras in my car, and I admit I rely on it a little bit too much, so my rearview mirror isn't perfectly aligned like it should be. Instead, it lets me view the back seat, something I'd adjusted for it recently when I was taking my niece and nephew out for, ironically, McDonald's. And as such, glancing into the rearview mirror allowed me to notice that there was someone lying on the floor in the back seat. Now, I could tell he was a guy in his mid-20s, and I also could tell that he was holding some kind of weird knife, and I don't know how to describe it. It was clearly some type of kitchen implement, but I'd never seen a knife like that before. And I suddenly realized that the delivery customers had kept me at the door for so long without turning back to my own vehicle that it could have allowed one of them to actually slip inside. Now, I didn't expect to be more than a minute or two, so I didn't lock the car behind me, and now I was regretting that immensely. What the hell did this guy have planned for me? He was just laying there, staring off blankly like he was waiting for something, clutching that kitchen blade. Now, obviously, whatever he had planned was nothing good, and the first thing I did was I decided to do a stop looking in the rearview mirror, and I didn't want him to see that I'd seen him. Now, obviously, this was all happening within a split second. My heart was absolutely pounding, and I was certain that this was how I would die, with my throat slit as I was heading to an Uber Eats delivery. Now, up ahead, I saw the lights of a gas station. I kept my speed normal, and I didn't allow myself to react at all, and then moments before I reached the turning into the gas station, I shot forward, screeched into the parking lot, leapt out of my car, and then ran into that gas station. Now, I must have sounded like some crazy woman, yelling how a delivery customer stoner McDonald's order guy was hiding in my backseat and had a weird knife, and I didn't know what he had planned, and blah blah blah. I was just trying to explain the events and my theory and how I thought the delivery customer had distracted me, and I was almost telling all of this at once. Now, the clerk, an older man, looked at me like I was on meth, understandably so, and then started to ask me to explain everything again. However, he kind of froze and his mouth was now hanging open, then I followed his gaze. An absolutely ridiculously tall man was kind of unfolding himself from my back seat, and we watched as he fled into the darkness of the night. Now, bear in mind, this was on the edge of the suburbs, so he fled into some kind of forested area. And from the expression on his face, I couldn't even claim to this day that he meant me harm. It almost looked like he was petrified too. Of course, that didn't stop me calling the cops. They got to the gas station really fast and searched the nearby area. They did, in fact, find a knife nearby. Apparently, it was some kind of fish knife for sushi, but it had nothing on it. When they paid to visit the delivery customers, they were just as baffled as I was. Everyone was accounted for, which they could prove, and nobody who lived there matched the description that I gave of the guy who'd crept into my back seat. Now, I never did find out who he was or what his motives were. I didn't quit my delivery job or anything silly like that. I just took to actually locking the car door whenever I stepped out to make a delivery, regardless of how brief I thought it would be. And I always checked the back seat no matter what. Something tells me that the guy hiding out in my car didn't mean me harm, but the look of fear and alarm on his face as we watched him flee makes me think that someone out there would have done us more harm than I can even fathom if they'd found it. It's one of those creepy mysteries that I'm grateful didn't turn into an unsolved murder and has finally given me something to write into you about. But like they say, be careful what you wish for, because I feel like this was a cautionary tale where the lesson is that it's far better not to wish you had a scary story to share with internet people. So I'm from England, and I won't say where so as not to dox myself or lose my job, but I'm a postwoman, or a postie as we say here, and I love my job. I work a rural route, and I've been on the same route for years, thanks to some pleading and a friendship with the head postmaster. Normally, posties get shifted around all the time. And so I kind of know everyone on my little route, at least everyone who makes themselves known to me anyway. There was Stu, a mature student who would always be waiting at the door whenever the mail came and shared his latest work on marine biology with me. I hadn't started out as being remotely interested in marine biology, but Stu had mentioned a few things in passing and I'd been hooked, pun intended. Now there was old Mrs. Rader, who always seemed to have some insane medical ailment which she'd relay to me with the greatest of glee, and I became convinced that she was a medical miracle. And then there was the Four Bottoms, an extremely flamboyant glam rock band by night and a middle-aged polycule who enjoyed cardigans and gardening by day. And then there was Joe and Joanne, two twins with rich parents who often got Amazon parcels in the mail, and I've never seen two kids who were more spoiled but more grateful for everything they'd got. Now the one guy I never got to know was Farmer McKay, the allegedly grouchy postman-hating farmer who lived in the small holding on the outskirts of town. Now, to call it a farm would be extremely generous, but it did have a few goats, a couple of sheep, a pig, and some chickens, and it was also filthy, even by farm standards, and as far as I know, he made an entire living selling eggs and milk to locals. Now, I gotta admit, I prefer Sainsbury's. Now, one day, for the first time in about 6 years of doing this route, I was shocked to find that I had a collection for McKay's farm. Not everyone knows this, but you can book Royal Mail to collect parcels, often for free, instead of having to take them to a post office. McKay had booked a free collection with instructions absolutely not to knock and disturb him, but instead find the package in an outhouse which he kindly uploaded a picture of so there was no mistaking it. Now, I made sure that I wore my wellies that day, as I didn't fancy wading across the sludge that McKay called a yard. It turns out I made the right call because the mud leading to the safe place outhouse was almost up to my ankles. When I opened the outhouse, I was met with a smell that almost made me gag. I didn't even want to look at what else he kept in there, but thankfully the Royal Mailbox was visible right at the front, so I grabbed it and headed back to my van. Now, halfway back to my vehicle, I noticed that the parcel was leaking. Real disgusting, foul-smelling liquid dripping out of the bottom of the box. Well, there's absolutely no way that I can take this as a collection for a million reasons. And now, I also couldn't just abandon it, which meant that I had to break his cardinal rule and go knock on his door and tell him that, unfortunately, I couldn't accept his collection. Halfway between my van and the front door of the farm, the package I'm carrying sort of collapses inward. The bottom falls out and the contents spill all over my bottom half. Now, let me tell you, I've smelled some bad smells in my time. Before I became a postwoman, I was a nursing assistant in my late teens and early 20s, and there was this one old lady that I treated who I would swear had Death himself living in her nether regions. This made that smell like flowers and cinnamon. It was a pile of rotting, liquefying organs, and now it was covering as much of my legs and torso as it managed to besmirch. I dropped the destroyed parcel and threw up there and then, which really didn't help matters. And now I was kind of mad at Farmer McKay. There are extremely strict rules about what you can and can't mail in the UK, and rotting, liquefied offal is definitely a forbidden item. I didn't even need to check the handbook to know about that. But then I started looking at all that stuff. Maybe my imagination was running away from me, but I was sure that I could make out part of a human spine among the gore. An eyeball winked out at me, clearly fresher than some of the other unspecified parts that covered me, the ground, and everywhere. Now I suddenly got this idea that McKay was trying to use the Postal Service to hide evidence of a crime, and standing out there in the open in the center of this small holding in the middle of nowhere, I suddenly felt very vulnerable and exposed. At this point, I didn't know what to do. I was convinced my colleagues would give me absolute crap if I fled the scene, but I started picturing Farmer McKay hiding behind a curtain, looking out one of the windows, a cocked shotgun aimed right at me. And so I kind of ran toward the main house. As the front door began to open before I even reached the porch, I wondered if I'd made a terrible, terrible mistake. But the man who stood on the doorstep wasn't Farmer McKay. I could see the resemblance, but he was a much younger man, and as he took in the sight of me covered in those organs and trembling in fear, I could see genuine guilt and regret on his face. He didn't invite me inside. You can hardly blame him. I was dripping in unspecified corpse juices. But there on the doorstep, he explained that Farmer McKay had been taken away by doctors the day before after increasingly strange and erratic behavior that had gone unnoticed by his family. He apologized profusely for the parcel collection being overlooked because they should have known that something was awry. McKay never sent packages. I was severely shaken, not least because I couldn't face the idea of getting in my beloved post van covered in this. And thankfully, the grandson, as that's who he turned out to be, helped me hose off the worst of it before I headed back to my van. It's what I saw in the back that really caused this to be a scary story, though. I made the mistake of glancing into the dilapidated barn as I trekked across the mud to my post van, and I only caught a quick glimpse because I looked away as quickly as possible. But no matter how many hot showers I took to wash off all those juices and the gore from my body, I can never scrub the sight that I saw from my mind. In the barn, Farmer McKay had piled what were presumably all of his animals. I couldn't make out which species they were. They'd all melted into one festering, indiscernible pile of corpses. A number of empty cardboard boxes sat nearby, and I can only assume McKay planned on shipping the remains of his animals to various places. To this day, it drives me mad that I never checked and don't remember who the recipient of the original parcel was. I have no idea what his motive was for mailing these liquefied parts, and I guess that's partly the problem with whatever was wrong with him. Dementia, or whatever had befallen him. It doesn't make sense. He could have been aiming for revenge on his enemies, and he could have believed that he was shipping genuine prime cuts to customers of his farm. Either way, I'm not sure I ever want to know. The McKay small holding was demolished not long after, and after what I saw, I can't say I'm at all sorry that it became one less stop on my postal route. So I'm not much of a storyteller, so I'll try my best here, but I've always wanted to try my hand at putting this story down on paper. In the early 90s, I was a bicycle courier for a local mom-and-pop pizza joint here in New York City. I got in the job while I was still in high school, thanks to my dad being a regular customer at the store and getting to know one of the owners, the husband, who we'll just call Pop Soul. Pop and Mama Soul ran the pizza joint and had been running it for as long as I can remember. It had been my favorite pizza place ever since I was a little kid, and I'd even had a couple of birthday parties there, even though I was only really designed for a handful of dine-in customers. And then beyond that, it became a staple that every birthday, same for my sister, we'd get copious amounts of Soul pizza pies. That's not to mention the pizzas we'd get just because, good God, once you tried Soul's pizza, nowhere in NYC compared. And my brother, who'd left home by the time I was 6 or 7, never seemed to eat at that pizza place. And when I asked him one time, he just said that he wasn't a fan of a lot of things about them, quote-unquote. So one day, my dad calls me aside and says, "Son, I got you your dream job." Now at the time, I wanted to be a military sniper, an F-18 pilot, or a pro street racer or something like that, but I was pretty sure that Dad hadn't hooked me up with something like that. But when he told me that I was going to be a bicycle delivery boy for Soul Pizza, I was almost as psyched, especially because this meant that I got one free pizza a week and a 10% discount off orders like all the time. And I got to ride my bike all over the city, something I loved doing anyway, while getting some cash in my pocket to see me through the last year of high school. What could be better, I thought. And things went absolutely smoothly with Soul Pizza for the first month or so. According to Pop Soul, I was, quote, the best goddamn bike boy they'd ever had, and hiring me was the best decision he'd ever made since marrying Mama Soul. And considering he had kids and had no doubts made other major decisions since then, I wasn't sure I believed all this praise, but I wasn't going to argue if Pop wanted to keep me sweet. Now, the free pizza was a kicker too. The first couple of weeks, I was too shy to ask for anything but a margarita, but then one day, Pop says, "Come on, son. I know you like your pies heavy with toppings. Go nuts. Ask for whatever you want." And so I did. I tried out so many combinations, so many wild pizza mixtures that, by God, I wish I could remember some of them, because I swear if I could start my own pizza chain with pre-made pizzas using toppings that nobody ever thought of before but are absolutely heaven-sent. Now, unfortunately, the events that happened a few months into my time at Soul's Pizza kind of made me forget everything that had gone down, other than the incident. Now, I still remember the fateful order that kicked everything off, though. It was a double pepperoni with extra cheese, side order of garlic bread too, and the delivery address was downtown, somewhere I wasn't familiar with, but I checked the location on a map. Yeah, no MapQuest or GPS or whatever was back then, and I figured that I could get there pretty easily, so I loaded up the pizza, leaped on my bike, and headed toward what I thought was the optimal route to my location. It turns out the location was a series of warehouses, and I should have realized something was wrong then and there, although it wasn't entirely unheard of that we delivered to places of work or other odd locations. I stopped the bike, trying to work out exactly where Warehouse 13 was in this maze of identical metal sheds, when suddenly a van comes screeching out of nowhere and pulls to a stop inches from my bike. Now, I'm just kind of left confused at this point. So much so that I don't react when the four masked men come bursting out of the back of the van and just full body snatch me off of my bike, each of them grabbing a limb to stop me from thrashing and then throw me into the back of the van. Now, stupidly, I remember that the first thing I yelled was that, "Hey, there was a pizza on that bike," and it was going to get cold and had to be delivered before the 35-minute delivery promise was up. Now, one of the three masked men who'd climbed back into the rear of the van with me seemed to find this crazy hilarious and couldn't stop laughing. And I guess the fourth man had gotten into the front passenger seat because another of the guys' open palms slapped the dividing wall, indicating to the driver that we should head off. Now, I winced as I heard the sound and felt the crunch of my bike being run over as the van drove forward. And the next thing I know, I felt a little prick on the side of my neck. One of the guys had shot me up with something, and it only took a minute or two before I was fully out. Now, after being completely blacked out, the next thing I knew, I woke up in what appeared to be a basement. It wasn't some dirty basement, though. It appeared to be at least carpeted and somewhat high quality, which for some reason I found reassuring in the moment. A couple of the men were there too, and at no point did they remove their masks, which I knew from watching way too many action and spy movies might actually be a good sign. Now, they barely spoke to me, but told me that I'd be fine as long as I just shut up and stayed put and did anything I was told. I spent the next 3 days in that basement, and I'd be lying if I said that it wasn't hell. Although the constant fear that they could turn on me and kill me at any moment, it was just kind of a buzzkill. Now, I was given 1 meal a day and a glass of water whenever I asked for one, and I was also escorted to the bathroom in an adjoining room whenever I asked to go. Now, it was the 1 meal a day that had me curious, though. It was pizza. Every meal was pizza. And not just pizza, but pizza from another rival mom-and-pop pizza restaurant a few blocks over from the joint I worked at. Now, naturally, I assumed that this was some pizza parlor gang turf war, and I couldn't have been more wrong, though. Being fed pizza from the rival joint was just the kidnapper's idea of a joke, I guess. And so after 3 days of being vaguely threatened with death but treated bizarrely well, I was shot up again with whatever knocked me out the last time, and the next thing I know, I'm lying on the sidewalk outside of Soul Pizza. My old place of employment was now boarded up, with crime scene tape covering a number of the boards. Eventually, after pulling myself together and heading into a pharmacy to grab some Tylenol, bizarrely, the kidnappers had dropped me off with $20 in my shirt pocket, despite the fact that I was carrying no cash when they grabbed me, and I made my way to the local police station. And then I told them everything, how I'd been grabbed, how I'd been strangely well treated, and how Soul Pizza was now closed down. Now, the desk sergeant was really weird and strange when he responded. Like, I really had to encourage him to take the details of my story down. And eventually he did so, going through the motions, but then he gave me this sort of knowing look and told me that I should count myself lucky, because the people I worked for, the lovely elderly couple who had been a pizza joint staple since I was a kid, were not good people at all. He then explained that there had been a police raid while I was kidnapped, and wasn't that weird and lucky that I hadn't been caught in the crossfire and ended up safe. And then he asked me to pass his regards to my much older brother, who himself was a cop working vice at another department. Now, it was all incredibly baffling and strange, at least until I spent some time thinking about it. You see, I'm pretty sure that the guys who kidnapped me were the cops, doing a favor for my brother, and I think he'd want to ensure that I wasn't wrapped up in all of that. And so instead of doing what any sensible brother would do by taking me aside and explaining things, he had his cop friends kidnap me and scare me half to death as a way of ensuring that I didn't accidentally get shot and killed. And that's the best case scenario I can come up with anyway. Everything else results in me coming even closer to almost dying, and that's all too hard to comprehend. My brother has sadly passed away now, so I can't ask him, but I'd like to think that he was my guardian angel that day. Otherwise, it was mere luck and the grace of God that prevented me from losing my entire life over becoming a pizza delivery boy from my favorite childhood restaurant. When I was a little kid, for reasons I won't go into, I lived with my maternal grandparents around 80% of the time. Time spent with Mom and her various boyfriends was not so good, but on the other hand, Grandma doted over me. Grandpa was stoic, a regimental man who showed me nothing but respect, but we weren't close in the same way Grandma and I were. From an early age, I'd learned that being coddled was a bad thing, so I made sure to try my best and live up to Grandpa's belief that I should be a real man, trademark. And then when he wasn't looking, which was most of the time, I'd happily let Grandma baby me and treat me like her special little boy. Cookies, treats, $1 slipped in my pocket here and there, and the kind of freedom and pleasant treatment that I most certainly did not get at home on the rare occasions when Mom was ruled suitable to look after me, and also decided to make the effort to demand that her mother send me back to her. Now thankfully, by the time I reached around 12 years old, I'm pretty sure Mom had either completely given up caring or forgotten that I existed altogether. The last time I saw her involved a screaming fight and my grandparents silently marching me away from the house. I haven't seen or spoken to my mother since in 10 years, and I'd be lying if I said I regret it. Everything with Grandma and Grandpa was like a dream compared to my upbringing. Like I said, as an ex-army guy, Grandpa could be a bit regimental, but I never actually got to see him act out any of his warnings. I think he just felt like he should make vague rumblings about being a strict father figure. Honestly, the idea of disappointing Grandpa and not growing up into a good, clean, classic man was enough to keep me on the straight and narrow by itself, but maybe that's just who I was, a very regular, normal guy. Now, one of my favorite activities with Grandma was the Christmas card run. There would be no mailing Christmas cards with Grandma, at least not to anyone within a 40-minute driving distance of our home, and Grandma and Grandpa were both extremely popular figures in the community, so they had a pretty extensive Christmas card list. Right up until my early teens, I used to get genuinely excited about doing the Christmas card rounds with Grandma in early December, and it really felt like the season had truly begun. Now, I loved it, right up until the time I stopped loving it anymore because we both almost died, purely for delivering Christmas cards. It was a crisp, cold morning, the kind that you don't mind being cold because it feels like Christmas is in the air. We were headed to the third delivery of the day. This year, we had so many cards to hand deliver that we set aside that Thursday and Friday. The recipients were an elderly couple, older than Grandma and Grandpa, who they went to bingo with and occasionally got together with, along with a few other couples from that social circle. I forget their names now, bizarrely, but we'll just call them the James couple. Now, Mr. James was one of those quiet, balding, bespectacled guys who Grandpa had told me, almost disapprovingly, was into model trains and bird watching. He'd never served in the army due to a bum knee. Again, something Grandpa told me, although this time he almost said it with regret for the man, like the fella had missed out in life by not having dodged bullets in Nam like Grandpa had. Now, Mrs. James was known as something of a firecracker, and more than once she'd accused newcomers of cheating at bingo and woe betide anyone who promised her bottles of baked goods for various sales and raffles and then didn't end up delivering. And the plan was just to walk up to the front door, slide the card through the mail slot, and then leave. Sometimes we'd knock and spend 5 minutes with Grandma shooting the breeze. But the Jameses weren't really small talk material, just friendly enough to be on the Christmas list. We had just reached the front door when an ear-splitting crash rocked my world and the door splintered outwards. I dove left, Grandma dived right, and it's a miracle neither of us were hit. We were both disoriented from the sound of the shot, which left us with a kind of disorienting tinnitus, and over the din we could hear Mrs. James yelling, seemingly at Mr. James about the hussy he'd been seeing. More shotgun blasts could be heard from inside the house, and Mr. James was arguing in an almost infuriatingly calm voice that Mrs. James needed to be reasonable about this and understand that men have needs and that she meant nothing to him. Now to this day, I have no idea why Grandma didn't just force us to hightail it back to the car, but she always was a bit of a gossiper. Instead, she encouraged me to crouch down, hidden behind a brick wall, and we listened as the James couple argued with each other, punctuated by shotgun blasts that didn't seem to come close to hitting their targets, but were shooting splinters out of the wooden walls, blowing out windows and all sorts of stuff. Now, how Mr. James had the absolute balls to face down his obviously insane wife, I'll never know. All I can assume is that he was somehow 100% confident that she wouldn't shoot him. However, they had no idea anyone was outside, and while Grandma made me crouch there, gathering the gossip while I trembled in complete terror, another shotgun blast came bursting through the window right above my head. Now, a piece of the buckshot even clipped my ear, I think, and I started screaming, thinking I'd been shot. And that's what shook Grandma out of her lunacy. She had to get her grandson out of there, and get me out of there she did. And with superhuman strength, Grandma swooped me up over her shoulder and power ran toward the car, successfully managed to open the driver's side door and throw me through in one fell swoop. And then she dived in behind me, and finally, we drove around the block from the James's house. Now, these were the days before cell phones, but thankfully someone had called the cops, and suddenly screaming sirens and lights came charging down the street. Grandma said that that was our cue to leave because we had too many cards to deliver and not enough time to give a statement to the police. And besides, they never even know we were there. A long story short, I had nightmares for months afterwards about delivering Christmas cards that blew up in my hand. Mrs. James was charged with criminal damage, neglect, and mishandling of a firearm, but received a suspended sentence. This was aided by the fact that Mr. James did not press charges, and in fact, the couple stayed together after all that ordeal. Grandma and Grandpa avoided them as best as possible at bingo, though, and did not socialize with them anymore. They never admitted to the couple that we'd been there that day, and frankly, I'm glad because I'm not sure that I could have stomached having to face Mrs. James again as she tried to apologize for almost accidentally killing us. We still continued delivering Christmas cards together for the next few years, until my high school studies meant that I was a little too busy to spend as much time with Grandma. But I'm happy to report that after that insane shooting incident, Grandpa removed the James's couple from her Christmas list, and we never had to deliver to them again. No, I'm just going to admit this up front. I was an absolute a-hole in college. Like the kind of smug, not quite rich jokester, prankster who thinks he's way funnier than he is. And I'm also glad this was around 15 years ago because a few years later, and I genuinely think that I would have tried to launch a career as one of those intolerable YouTube pranksters. You know the ones I'm talking about. Now thankfully my pranking days extended solely to being the class clown. And this led to a certain fraternity paying attention to me and encouraging me to pledge, so I did. Honestly, I loved the hazing. I was the one getting pranked, sure, but it made me the center of attention, and I was always up for going a step further than my fellow pledges. Now looking back, I probably came across like the most cringe tryhard imaginable, and the frat bros scouting me out must have thought that they'd lucked out with a clueless gooner like me. Now, I still wonder to this day whether if things had turned out differently, I would have been rejected from the fraternity anyway, and I kind of think that maybe I would have as the ultimate prank. And so when I was doing my initiation, it was back when Amazon had just gotten really big, and with their meteoric rise, we'd also seen a decline in the quality of delivery drivers. It was that weird period between Amazon drivers treating your packages like a Goomba from Mario, and Ring doorbells only existing for the rich and famous. And so regularly, Amazon packages were just free for the taking, dumped into people's yards or left on their front doorsteps ready for some complete idiot like me to come along and swipe them, and then inevitably trash the contents unless it was something really good, which it never was. Now, I must have stolen upwards of 15 packages from poor, stupid Amazon customers. Now, one time I got a box of lingerie, and another time there was this wiener pump, and those are literally the only two remotely interesting things I stole. Mostly I just took people's vitamins, a dog bowl, a little plush toy, and some exercise equipment and other assorted stuff. And then one day, I saw it. A large, tantalizing package sitting on a doorstep just there for the taking. It had to be something good, like a microwave oven or a custom kitchen delivery. It just had to be, and I knew it. Now, I could feel it in my bones, so I had my idiot cameraman, another pledge, film me creeping up to do a crab walk in a hoodie and jeans like I was some type of Temu iDubbbz. And then I grasped the package with both hands and yanked it backwards. It exploded. And I don't mean one of those cute glitter bombs that they use now. I mean, it literally exploded. It burned my face and scorched my hoodie, the polyester, right to my skin. No, I was screaming and disoriented in absolute agony. My cameraman, the coward that he was, had already shrieked and ran away. And then they came, leaping out of the bushes, a group of masked men waiting for me to try to steal that package. Now, I was down for the count, suffering from what felt like third-degree burns, but realistically were probably only first-degree. They felt worse, though, as the masked men started kicking and punching me. They were yelling at me for being a thief, a scum, a criminal. They said I was everything wrong with America, that I was ruining the fabric of this goddamn country. All because I tried to steal an Amazon package as part of a fraternity prank. And you know what? I can't disagree with them. I was a prick, and I deserved a kicking. And I can't say I deserved the shattered eye socket or the permanent limp or the shattered arm that required a metal rod to hold it together, and maybe that punishment was a bit extreme. But at the time, I did convince myself that I deserved it. And the paramedics were called by a neighbor, obviously, long after the masked men had disappeared. But I told them I was jumped by a gang of young people from a rival college, and no, I had no idea who they were, and I preferred that they didn't pursue the crime if possible. And the cops honestly seemed all too happy to oblige. Less work, less paperwork, I guess. And I really did convince myself that I had it coming, and maybe I was right. Maybe I did. But here's the really weird part, though. I went back to that house months later, and I wasn't sure if I'd approach or not, but I decided to just watch from my car for a while. Maybe it had new owners. Maybe this wasn't who I tried to steal the package from. But the people living in the house now were a young family with 2 young kids. None of them seemed like the type to be involved in a violent assault. And so to this day, I don't know if I was targeted by someone related to the household or a group of violent vigilantes who were going after people like me. Now, the latter idea is kind of terrifying because it kind of makes me wonder, what if they decided that I haven't changed my ways enough and come after me again? Now, I've tried my best. I've tried to be a clean living boy, and one thing's for sure. I did not pursue joining that fraternity after all, and a regular dorm room and weekly chess club is all the excitement I want in my life. Thank you very much. I'm a long-haul trucker, proud partner in my 18-wheeler Lucy, and I have been for approximately 18 years. This story I've got to share is from my first few years on the job when I was still a little youngling, excited by everything and not yet world-weary, as they say. I love the CB radio for one, and I'd always have a chat with fellow drivers if anyone was acting particularly talky on a given night. These days, I barely bothered to answer it unless I'm really bored because, frankly, most other people are boring as dog crap and I have no interest in what they have to say. Now back then, though, there was this other trucker who'd often be yammering away on the CB, mostly to himself. He went by the name of Boxcar Willie, I guess probably after that singer. Now we didn't use real names, we just had call signs. Mine was effing Ironhide, like the Transformer, but also because I thought that I was a clever bastard calling myself Ironhide when I spent 80% of my working hours sitting on my butt driving that truck. Boxcar Willie isn't hugely important to the story, but he is important, so just bear with me. Now, when this all began, me and Boxcar Willie were chatting away about some of the dumbest crap imaginable. Aliens, Bigfoot, chupacabras, all that kind of stuff. And to this day, I don't know if he was screwing with me, but Willie claimed that not only did he believe in all of this stuff, he had evidence of it in the remote trailer he lived in when he wasn't off trucking. Occasionally another trucker would chime in to let me know that Boxcar Willie was full of dog do and he was just winding me up. But Willie played it dead straight. He swore blind that he'd come face to face with Bigfoot one time when he'd had to stop for that hairy fella in the middle of the dark mountain road. But Christ, who knows? The point is, all this talk about Bigfoot and cryptids for some reason made me hungry as hell, so when the next rest stop sign lit up, I decided that I was just going to pull in and get myself the biggest hot dog man has ever seen, or at least the biggest one that the gas station sold. So that's exactly what I did. The dogs had clearly been cooking on that spinning grill for way longer than is healthy, and they looked about as appetizing as a shrunken head, but I didn't care. I got 2 of them. Piled them ass-high with onions, mustard, and ketchup, and then threw in one of those crushed ice slushies, a huge one, and fumbled my way back to my truck. I pulled out of that rest stop and proudly told Boxcar Willie and whoever else was listening that I just landed the best pair of dogs this side of the Midwest. I may have been exaggerating on that title a little, and weren't they just jealous? Now, of course, Willie had a story about this one time that he found a roadside hot dog seller who only appeared once every 10 years or some nonsense. He was entertaining if nothing else, biggest liar you ever met who wasn't a politician. Now anyway, my route is pretty straight and clear for the next 100 miles, so I'm feeling pretty safe about munching down on one of my overcooked dogs, wrapped in a bun that was even more disappointingly stale than I'd hoped for. And that's when I heard it, a noise from behind me from inside the trailer. Of course I made the mistake of telling Boxcar Willie, who began to psych me up with tales of cryptids and ghouls who preyed on truckers. Now naturally this was a load of horse manure, but I was unsettled by the sound, if only because I was driving an extremely straight bit of road and I didn't like the idea that some cargo actually came loose. Now after a while, the sound stopped, and I figured whatever it was had kind of sorted itself out. Now I forget what I was carrying at the time, but it was kind of a heavy electrical goods situation that couldn't really easily get damaged, so I paid it no mind and carried on driving. And then I heard some more noise from behind me. I listened real hard, but by now I'm convinced that there are footsteps in the back of the trailer. I mentioned this to Willie, who of course has a story of something similar, only this one gets under my skin and actually spooks me. Can't even remember the crap that he shared at the time. Now on top of that, I'd finished my hot dog, drank way too much of my slushie, and I needed to piss. And there was no rest stop for miles, so I pulled onto the shoulder, scanned the darkness for any vehicles. There clearly were none coming for quite a few solid minutes, and got out. I took a piss first. I didn't want to pee myself in fear at whatever might be in that trailer. And then I examined the trailer itself. It was fully locked and sealed in a completely satisfactory manner, really. And the idea that someone had gotten in while I was getting my gross hot dogs was really unlikely. And yet, I pulled open the back doors of the trailer, about to yell gotcha, almost as a joke to myself, and as soon as I started to pull open those doors, they came flying towards me, and I had to leap backwards to avoid getting smacked. An absolutely deranged, elderly woman came leaping out. She was wearing torn-up jeans and an absolutely filthy bra. Nothing else. In her hand, she was gripping my X-Acto knife that I kept in the trailer in case I needed to slice through any of the plastic ties that kept boxes in place. And this woman, I swear to God, hissed at me and lunged at me, and with a strength way unexpected for a woman of seemingly her age. She shoved me onto my ass so hard that I had a bruised tailbone for a week, and then she swiped at me with that X-Acto knife, more of a warning than anything else, and disappeared around the side of the cab. Now, I'm not one to get knocked on my butt by anyone, let alone a methed-out granny, so I scrambled to my feet and headed to that cab. Instead of being long gone, the old woman was sitting in the driver's seat, munching away on my second hot dog, and a look of pure bliss is on her face. I slammed the driver's side door shut, locked it with the fob from outside, and then called the cops. Thankfully, I did actually have service. And it took them over an hour to show up, during which time I watched as the meth-head grandma ate my hot dog, finished my slushie, and then just fell asleep behind the wheel of my 18-wheeler. And when the cops finally got there, they picked her up. They couldn't get any straight answer out of her about how she'd gotten into my trailer, and she apparently couldn't even speak English at all. I checked the cargo, and she'd done no damage to anything back there, so when the cops asked if I wanted to press any charges for assault, I just decided against that, so long as they made sure that she got the help that she clearly needed. Plus, I had a deadline to make, and I was already a whole bunch behind schedule. As I finished my delivery, I shared that story with the CB radio, and you can best believe that Boxcar Willie had some kind of bat-crap story about a ghostly woman who matched her description. But this time, it was the first time I could see through the fact he was clearly making it up on the fly. His silly ghost stories were nothing compared to the real fear of facing down an unhinged woman being with a sharp weapon, never knowing how they'll react. I hope the old lady got the support she needed. I try not to think about how she got into my trailer. I'm pretty sure she must have snuck in when I originally loaded the cargo, which meant that she'd been back there for a good 6 hours before I caught her. Now, I'm just glad things played out the way they did, and some poor worker boy at the end station didn't end up taking a blade to the throat. Now, people are strange, scary, and weird, and that's why these days I keep to myself, and instead of spending all my time answering the CB, I learned to appreciate the solitude that being a trucker allows. This happened to my dad back in the 1960s, and he's given me permission to share it with you. He worked as a paperboy for quite a few years back in the days when kids made a decent living hurling papers from their bikes as they cycled past. Dad, however, went that extra mile. He actually stopped at every house and gently placed the paper on the front stoop. It made him a real popular paperboy, and come Christmas time, he'd often find a little thank you card and a tip pinned to the door of some of his deliveries. Now, one woman took a real shine to him, I guess. A real shine, as it was around February, and for the first time ever, this old woman was waiting on the porch for him. She invited him in for a drink and a vague insinuation that there would be a financial reward following that, i.e., a tip. And so Dad, the naive little kid he was, followed the old woman into her house and drank a drink with her. Now, the next thing he knows, he's suddenly waking up tied to a dining room chair, and the old woman is cavorting in front of him, naked as the day she was born, rambling about how she'd been craving a man's touch. Of course, Dad's like 8 years old at this point and totally horrified by everything that's going on. Thankfully, also being an 8-year-old, he's able to squeeze his way out of the pathetic knots that this perverted old hag has tied around him, and so screaming bloody murder, Dad manages to pull himself free from the naked old woman's dining chair and then basically fling himself from the house, leap onto his bike, and catapult himself through town back to the grocery store that he worked for. And when he got there, the owner took him aside and, a weird turn of events, offered him $10, a hell of a lot of money back then, to keep quiet about the whole ordeal. Now, he promised he wouldn't have to deliver papers to that old woman again as long as he kept quiet and accepted the money. Of course, Dad being the dumb 8-year-old, he just took the deal without a moment's hesitation. It's become something of a family legend now, and the woman passed away not long after, and we never did find out the cause, motive, or twist behind any of it. We have no idea why she decided my dad would be the perfect male touch for her, and frankly, none of us wanted to know. It's just one of those things. There are weird people out there. Be careful, especially of strange old women. So something absolutely insane happened to me the other day, and I don't know who else to tell other than the cops, obviously, which I haven't done, and I hope you'll understand why. It was like 10 p.m. and I was just hanging out at home alone. My girlfriend was studying, so she wasn't over that night, and I heard a crash from outside and just kind of dismissed it as being the usual neighborhood crap. And then there was a knock at the door. I was a bit unsettled, obviously. I don't live in the safest neighborhood in the world, and so I looked through the peephole, and there's a pizza delivery guy standing there wearing what is clearly the uniform of a very famous pizza delivery brand. I can see over his shoulder that he has a branded delivery van as well, so okay, cool, seems pretty safe. But I didn't order pizza. Maybe my girlfriend did as a sort of treat, so I opened the door to the guy and began to explain to him that I didn't order that myself. Was there maybe some kind of note? Was it definitely the right address, etc.? Now, the guy just looks at me, removes the hot pizza from his bag, and then hurls the entire pie straight in my face. Now, it would have been comical if not for the fact it was searing hot. There was melted lava cheese running down my face, and I was suddenly freaking out in fight-or-flight mode due to the unexpected sudden assault. And I tried to mumble what the F through the pizza that's now dripping off my face and reach up to try and wipe the hot cheese out of my eyes. And that's when the delivery driver aims a swift, hefty kick straight between my legs, kicking me square in the nuts. Naturally, I doubled over in absolute agony, which at least had the bonus effect of causing any remnant pizza to droop off my face, and I'm just there gasping for air, gripping the side of the door, suddenly convinced that this lunatic driver is some kind of pizza-based serial killer is going to plunge a knife deep into my chest. Now, I tried to mumble and ask what the hell was going on, and then I distinctly and clearly hear this pizza guy, who I swear to God sounds like that acne-ridden teen from The Simpsons, go, "This is for my mother, you scum-suck psycho." I'm just absolutely floored. I have no idea who this guy is, or who his mother is, or what I've done to her. Possibilities start running through my head, but I barely have time to consider them when he sort of croaks and squeaks and then says, Oh, I'm so sorry. I've come to this wrong address. I'm so sorry." I managed to look up through tears of pain to see him run through my yard and leap into his very clearly branded pizza delivery car, and then he drives away at full speed. And that's when I realized that the crash I heard from earlier was this delivery psycho driving over my mailbox. And so I went inside and cleaned myself up and thankfully realized that I haven't suffered any serious damage from the scalding pizza to my face. And so naturally the first thing I do is call up my local pizza place that had that name and ask them if they had a delivery driver in the area. Apparently they'd been expecting my call because the girl in the other end of the line, who sounds like a pretty young person herself, suddenly starts begging me not to call the cops and apologizing over and over, saying that if I knew the full story, I'd understand. Now, I asked the girl to tell me the full story and she just said she can't. But if I promise not to call the cops, my next 3 pizzas will be free, and then I can order another free pizza every 6 months. And I genuinely weighed the option. I mean, it would be insane to take them up on that offer, right? But I'm a broke college student at the time. No harm was done. I have a funny story to tell friends, and I'm getting multiple free pizzas out of this deal. Plus, if someone has screwed with my mom in the way that was serious enough to cause this guy to act like this, I guess I can probably sympathize. And so I didn't call the cops, and I took them up on the offer of the free pizzas. The first one arrived tonight. Do you think I did the right thing? I guess I'm just kind of easily bought. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and there are super fun live streams every Sunday and Wednesday nights. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over at my email, letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. Now, if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. I also have a true crime channel called Saturn Soul. You should check it out. All links in the descriptions below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, can AI do this?